I have full presentations on equivalency. It gets complicated quickly. Generally, I would say this was a major good news story. Canada led the way. We changed the global organic marketplace, and we continue to be the leaders in showing the rest of the world how we can probably get along a bit better in the organic marketplace, allow good products to flow, and still maintain the rigor of our domestic standards and the strength and the control of our own standards here in Canada. There are a number of, that said, there are a number of difficulties, wrinkles, frustrations that we deal with regularly, and some of you probably have dealt with as well. But essentially, Canada and the US in 2009 struck the world's first fully reciprocal equivalency agreement, which allows a Canadian producer to be certified to the Canadian standards, but access that major market to the south and carry that USDA logo without a second certification to that standard. We also, in 2011, were the first country to expand that into the European Union. And so, for a time, for about a year, Canada was the only country in the world that had direct access through one certification to the European Union and the United States, 96% of the world market with one domestic certification. The US and Europe have since closed that triangle, and they recognize each other's. But that's really it. Those are the three real jurisdictions or areas that are systems that are agreeing to speak to each other at this time. But there's a lot of activity in the background on this. One thing we need to note, though, is that there are problems with these as well, and we're working on these. The US to Canada system is what we call a system-to-system equivalency. So any USDA NOP product that's meeting the US requirements is accepted in Canada, and anything from anywhere in the world that's meeting the Canadian system is accepted into the United States. When we struck the agreement with Europe, the Europeans put in place a restriction that only products grown in Canada could come into Europe through this agreement, which sounds straightforward enough, but if you're doing anything other than basic ingredients or commodity supplies, you get pretty challenged to have a 100% Canadian product. If you're a manufacturer, you don't have a lot of Canadian cinnamon, sugar, or vanilla, among other things, to put into your product. So that's become a real issue, and unfortunately we are still allowing any European product in, which was the whole idea in the first place. So we're still working on that. We're working on the Europeans expanding their agreement to fully recognize our processed products as well. And we're pretty optimistic about that, but it's a slow-moving train. Another issue that's come up more recently, and some of you are probably selling into the Swiss market, or your product goes to Switzerland, they're a major buyer of meat, is that the Swiss recognize European certification to come into Switzerland, but since we reached an agreement with the Europeans, we don't have European certification anymore. We have Canadian certification that the Europeans recognize, and the Swiss said, well, we don't recognize Canadian, we recognize European. And so, you know, the wheat's just come off the fields, it's time to go to the millers in Switzerland, and the Swiss are informing us of this at this point. So it's a bit of a nightmare sometimes, but the good news is that the government has been very progressive in doing this and working with us and hearing from industry on these issues and these needs, and they're very responsive to that, and we anticipate very soon a solution to that Swiss problem, and we anticipate to see a bit more of this equivalency concept expand, and hopefully some of those wrinkles will get ironed out over the next couple of years. Next. I'm going to speak about marketing this afternoon with a panel. I should say that the panel, I hope, is going to speak, and I'll mostly just be there to moderate, but I'll touch a bit more on our export program. Some of you may have seen the announcement last week from the Minister of Agriculture of support for quota, $180,000 in matching funds to help us help Canadian exporters. And so what that basically is we organize trade missions, we go to trade shows, and we help some of you or some of your representatives go to those shows as well. We can bring 50 cents to every dollar you spend, whether it's an airfare, a trade show booth, that sort of thing. We also organize missions with the trade commissioners, with Agriculture Canada support and with industry members to go into certain markets that we've targeted and bring direct operators, producers, suppliers to the buyers in those countries and get that relationship building. So those are some of the activities we're doing with that funding. And right now our primary targets are based on the markets and the access points. So the United States, Germany, the Netherlands, and Japan, but we have a whole list of other markets like Taiwan and Hong Kong, and even Brazil that we're looking at as they grow and as that international dynamic changes. We want to be not overextending, but very strategic in how we get Canadian products into those marketplaces. So we have information at our booth, and if you're interested, you can always come by and speak to me about that. So here's where I'm going to walk through some of the issues that we're seeing out there, we're dealing with, or just those sort of big elephants in the room that we see as really critical over the next few years. And the first one, yeah, that's right. The first one is GMOs. Of course, we've had some pretty incredible talks at this conference telling us about some of that and some of the impacts of this current approach to agriculture. But there's a lot happening in this space as well. So there's some new acronyms to learn. LLP is low-level presence, and this is basically Canada leading the way in going to the World Trade Organization and proposing that we should stop making a problem out of unapproved GMOs that show up in trace imports. Which basically means if something that we haven't reviewed and we haven't authorized and we haven't done studies on or even reviewed the science of shows up in a shipment, we should just let it into the country and stop making that a problem. That's basically, in essence, if it's below a certain threshold, what the low-level presence policy is saying. And we have a problem with that. We think, A, it's supposed to, in terms of the philosophy of this, it's supposed to ease trade and make trade flow more, but we think it's actually going to impede trade and hurt the organic sector more than anybody else. And so we're pretty concerned about that. We also think Canadians are probably pretty concerned about the Canadian government washing its hands of having the responsibility to actually review this stuff that other countries are producing or sending our way. However, it's a difficult one to really engage consumers on because you're talking about such a small amount, but if it's coming in as a seed, what does that mean in the future for us? And if we're the only country that's gone out there and said, hey, we're okay with your unauthorized GMOs, do we have a big target as a dumping ground for rejected shipments from around the world? Those are some of the questions we're asking Ottawa to ask, and we're continuing to work on that. Some of the other things that are going on, ironically, we look at ourselves, we often think we're fairly progressive on some of these issues, but right now the United States is far ahead of us on dealing with the GMO problem. So there's two things happening right now. In a few days, on Tuesday, we're going to find out, or I guess Wednesday morning, who's the president of the United States. The other thing we're going to find out is whether California has mandatory labeling of GMOs through Proposition 37. And that's pretty fundamental. If California requires mandatory labels of GMOs, the whole country in the United States will go that way over time. And there will be more states that introduce that legislation. And it could be a massive game changer. And there's a lot at stake, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about it this afternoon from Archie, who's been very involved in this campaign. But that's really exciting and pretty tense because it's a fine line between the no vote and the yes vote, and there's no real way to gauge exactly how those voters are going to respond, similar to the Obama-Romney ticket. There's also federally in the United States the Just Label It campaign, which has seen over 1 million letters written to the FDA on this issue by consumers, the single highest number of submissions to the FDA in American history. And that's pretty significant. What's happening in Canada? What are we doing at a consumer level? Who are we engaging with? Is our government hearing about this concern? Not at all. They're really not. There's a lot of groups that are putting a lot of work into this, but somehow, for some reason, we don't have that consumer momentum yet. And so that's something I think we need to watch what's happening in the United States. It may have some influence for us here in Canada, and we need to keep an eye on that one. At the same time, the United States has allowed Roundup Ready alfalfa, and we had some pretty chilling presentations at this conference on some of some of the impacts of Roundup. And so, potential impacts that they could have on the health of our population and our environment. So, in Canada, Roundup Ready alfalfa is technically approved, it's just not registered yet. And, you know, that's a big concern. And there's a lot of meetings happening right now to talk about coexistence, or about bringing that into Canada, about stacking other traits in with that alfalfa gene over time. And this is an area we have to be very, very conscious of, because alfalfa, as all of you know, is a critical rotation. It's a massive part of our pasturing and feedstock. It's an export for seed and forage. And it's also a big part of our dairy sector. But our horticultural side also uses alfalfa a lot as well. So it's a big part of organic, and it's perennial, and it has a tiny seed that can mix in with everything. And so we need to be very aware of that, and we need to support some of the actions that are being taken. And I know SOG here in Saskatchewan is being a leader in this, and we need to really mobilize and organize around alfalfa right now, I think. I can share it. It's on YouTube, and I can share it with you. If you look up Proposition 37, you'll find it. But basically, this is a short clip that was done with a bunch of Hollywood actors and comedians and celebrities to engage the Californian consumer and talk to them about this right to know about GMOs in their food. And the yes side of the campaign is really just focusing on it's your right to know and make an informed decision as a consumer if there's GMOs in your food. The no campaign never says the word genetic, never says modified engineering, it never says GMO. They just say it's going to cost you so much more money at the grocery store, it's going to ruin farmers. All of these puppet doctors and scientists say it's bad. There's no mention of what the proposition is actually about. And as soon as consumers hear what it's about, there tends to be a stronger vote in favor of it. So it's going to be very interesting to see. But don't worry about it, Brenda, it's fine. So what interests me about this is that on the organic side, or on the yes to Proposition 37 side, we're still talking about transparency, we're still talking about traceability, we're still talking about integrity and information brought to the consumer, which is what we've always done in organic. And on the no side, they're just saying government regulation, red tape, expense, cost, confusion. They never actually say genetically modified in there. And, you know, at these conferences, these organic conferences, when we come together as a community, what we do and what we come together around are feasts like last night's, which was incredible. And we celebrate, and we clap, and we cheer, and we recognize the producers who supplied that organic food for us. We do that. We do that in my family when we have special meals. We're not particularly religious people, but when we have a special meal, we give thanks. And what we focus on in my family is who produced the food, and how it was produced, and where it came from. And we really thank the farmers. And my little girls, who are 6 and 3 now, they initiate that at almost every meal. They love that. And we talk about the farmers' names, because we're lucky enough to know who's growing our food. And we talk about where it was from. And now that we're in Ottawa and we're engaged in many of these meetings, and the government is doing a great job of saying organic has to be at the table, and they are doing that. They're internalizing organic into everything they do, and they're consulting with us. And so we go to these meetings in Ottawa, and we meet with other associations and other groups, and we're at the same table as, you know, Syngenta, Monsanto, CropLife, many of the Canola Council, many of these groups that are heavily invested in this, and we're sometimes even at their meetings. And they never say, everything you're going to eat tonight is genetically modified. I've noticed this. And I think that's a big difference. And I think we need to continue to celebrate and talk about what we're eating, who grew it, and where it came from, and have other people question who grew that, where did it come from, how was it grown. And one of the ways we do that is labeling. So I think we need to look at this. We need to watch what's happening in California, in the States, elsewhere. We need to look at what Europe has done, and we need to continue to work on this.